Hey guys,
Hello, friends.
welcome back to our show, Darkly Dubious Diaries.
Otherwise known as
My name is Tara Marie from True Crime Matters with Tara Marie.
And I am Dana Elizabeth from the TikTok Dana Elizabeth Original. And we love to discuss all things true crime and mysterious.
So for today's episode, we're going to dig into the true crime topic that so many people are talking about right now, and that is the Menendez brothers case. And today's episode will be part one of a two-part series. District Attorney George Gascón held a press conference Thursday, October 3rd, and he said it was amid calls for his office to re-examine the convictions of Erik and Lyle Menendez, who were convicted of killing their parents in August of 1989. Now, I'm sure that his office got totally inundated with calls after the Netflix series was released, and that was called Monsters, the Lyle and Erik Menendez story.
So the DA said that he believed that the convictions of the Menendez brothers deserved to be reevaluated following the alleged discovery of new evidence, as well as questions regarding testimony being disallowed in the second trial that ultimately led to the life sentences of the Menendez brothers. He discussed all possibilities as they investigate the new claims, and he added that he was keeping an open mind, whatever that means.
Sounds kind of hopeful. Yeah.
It does sound hopeful, which is, truly a huge development in this story. But now, before we explain what this new evidence was and what he was talking about, we will give a brief overview of the case.
On August 20th, 1989, a wealthy couple, Mary Louise, known as Kitty Menendez, and Jose, were watching TV in the den of their Beverly Hills mansion when something truly horrific happened. Later that night, their sons, Erik and Lyle Menendez, would place a hysterical phone call to 911, claiming that when they came home from a night out, they found their parents shot dead in the den of their home.
Beverly Hills emergency?
Yes, police.
What's the problem? What's the problem? What's the problem?
Someone killed my parents.
Pardon me?
Someone killed my parents.
What? Who? Are they still there?
Yes.
The people...
No.
Were they shot?
Hey, man, dude.
Were they shot?
Yes.
They were shot?
Yes.
102 response, 722 North Elmore.
What happened? Hey, stay there, man.
I have a hysterical person on. We're trying to get things further. Other units responding. Is the person still there?
What happened? We have units around. What happened? Who shot who? I don't hear anything. I just came home. You came home and found who shot? Mom and Dad.
You know if they're still in the house, the people that did the shooting.
Get away from him. Okay, hang on. Let me talk to Erik. Who is the person that was shot?
My mom and my dad.
Your mom and dad?
My mom and my dad.
Okay, hold on a second. Okay, we're on our way over there with the ambulance.
Okay, I gotta go.
Okay.
Oh.
Hello, this is police department.
Yes.
Okay, I want you to come outside. Okay, just come out the front door and
my brother.
Initially, police suspected that the mob was involved due to the gruesome nature of the murders. Lyle and Erik, who were 21 and 18 at the time, were taken in for questioning, but they were not at all considered suspects. And just to give you an idea of how much they were not considered suspects, the police didn't even check them for gun residue. I don't know if they just weren't used to having crimes in their area or something in Beverly Hills, because it's a very affluent area. So maybe they just didn't experience crimes like that. So they think the boys did it. I don't quite understand why they wouldn't even check them for gun residue.
I feel like it's the first thing on the list.
Right.
Yeah. So
it always kind of I never really understood why that wouldn't be, but I guess they just didn't suspect them.
It's bizarre that they didn't. Now, after their parents' deaths, some people did start to get suspicious of, the brothers. because it seemed that they were spending their inheritance way too quickly. They were purchasing extravagant things like Rolex watches, fancy cars, real estate, doing business ventures. But some people saw that the massive spending was just the status quo. Since the boys had grown up extremely wealthy, they pretty much grew up getting anything they wanted whenever they wanted it. So that didn't seem as strange, I suppose. But police kept up with their investigation, but they really had no evidence to support their case when suddenly there was a major breakthrough. And that was a woman named Judalon Smith, and she was the mistress of Erik's psychologist, and his name was Jerome Ozil. She actually called the police to reveal that Erik, during the therapy sessions, had confessed to Jerome that him and his brother had committed the murders. And she claimed that there were even audio tapes of these confessions, because obviously some psychologists do record conversations with clients or patients.
Yeah, and I remember looking into that or reading about that, and I believe that he actually asked first, is it okay if I record you? And the brother said yes. I mean, it wasn't like it was some hidden recording somewhere. He actually placed the recorder like right on the table. So the boys did know they were being recorded and they agreed to it, which to me always kind of like baffled me with this case. Like, not only did they go and, speak to this therapist and feel like they were in a safe place, because I think it was either Erik or I think it was Erik who did the research and discovered that in the state of California, even in situations where someone has committed a murder, a therapist is not supposed to, I guess, go to the authorities and tell them something like that. It's only in cases where the therapist says somebody's life is being threatened. At that point, they'd be able to go to the police. So Erik really felt safe and actually taking the time to speak to somebody about this, because he had a conscience. He was actually very guilty about what he did, and he had to talk to somebody about it. And that's what always made me look at this case, I guess, in a little bit of a different way, because most of these killers that we learn about or read about, they're keeping this a secret, right? Like they do something like this, they pre-plan it, and then they cover it all up. But with Erik, he not long after had to tell somebody else, which is the only reason why they're even in prison. And that to me shows guilt, and it shows a conscience. And that's definitely not something that somebody who's a sociopath or a psychopath would do, in my opinion. I mean, I'm not a therapist, but that always to me stuck out as like proof that this kid was like an emotional being, and something was happening in that house.
Said it almost feels remorseful to have done that, to go and actually speak to someone and say like, hey, I did actually do this.
Yeah, he had that level of guilt where he had to tell somebody, despite his brother. Meanwhile, his brother Lyle was ready to keep it a secret. Okay, so after Judalon went to police, just a few days after that, on March 8th, police obtained a search warrant for Ozil's tapes. And in listening to all 17 of those audio tapes, police were able to finally piece together what truly happened to Jose and Kitty. And at the time, the police weren't sure if they could even use those tapes as evidence due to the patient-therapist confidentiality barrier, but they took them regardless and figured that the court would actually have to rule on something like that. And then in March of 1990, Lyle and Erik were arrested and charged with the first-degree murder of their parents. At the time, Lyle was arrested first, and Erik was playing tennis in Israel when Lyle was arrested. He actually received word that Lyle was arrested, and then I believe he spoke to his aunt, and his aunt met him at the airport, and he turned himself in right at the airport where the police picked him up. So he didn't try to flee. He didn't try to delay coming back home. He actually just, set it up to where they could get him.
Oh.
Yeah. Isn't that nice of him?
That's super nice. So now the issue of the therapist audio tapes, like we've just said a second ago, they had to go all the way up to the California Supreme Court. And they actually argued, back and forth for 2 years over this. It wasn't, done in a very short space of time. It was a long period of time. And it was the law protecting the patient-therapist privilege. And even in situations where the killer confesses to a murder to their therapist, if the therapist does go to the police, they can actually be sued for malpractice. But the issue was that Dr. Ozil claimed that the boys had threatened the life of someone still alive. And Dr. Ozil himself thought it was on him. He thought his life was at stake. You know how true this is. He felt threatened if he were to tell anyone the truth about the murders. And in June of 1992, the California Supreme Court ruled that only one tape was not barred by the patient-therapist privilege because Oziel believed that the brothers had threatened him during the sessions on the tape. And after that final decision on the tape was made, that is when they were ready for the trial.
So yeah, like the whole issue with the tape, like I remember like looking into that a little bit, and Judulon, I can't remember if this was like testimony at the trial. I believe it was. When Erik was starting to confess, that is when Dr. Oziel immediately called Judulon Smith, who was his mistress, and he said, look, I believe that I've got a confession out of Erik Menendez that he killed his parents. Will you come sit in my lobby? Just to be like a witness. Will you just come sit? Maybe you can overhear some stuff because we're going to call Lyle to come in. Judulon left what she was doing and sat in the waiting room. And I believe that at trial, she was asked if she overheard Lyle threatening the life of Oziel. And she said that no, he did not. The only thing she heard, she heard something, but it had nothing to do with like a life-threatening thing. So many people believe that a quote that Dr. Oziel said to Judulon was, there's $14 million at stake here, Judulon. Many people believe that Oziel was recording the boys so he could blackmail them for $14 million. If they didn't pay $14 million, he would go to the police. So it looks to me like the boys were actually failed by their therapist because legally he shouldn't have told anybody what Erik revealed to him. So obviously, since the boys had confessed to the murders, their strategy was to aim for a manslaughter verdict. And back in the early 1990s, Court TV had just started, and they took a major interest in the Menendez case. Court TV then asked the judge if the trial could be televised. And the judge, Judge Weisberg, who was the same judge as the Rodney King trial, he approved cameras in the courtroom. And because of that, the trial began on July 20th, 1993, with the attention of the entire nation. Now, this case is unique for many reasons, and one is being that the judge ruled that the case would be heard by two juries at the same time. He apparently chose separate juries to ensure that evidence against one brother would not improperly sway the verdict of the other. Another reason why the case is so unique is because the boys rattled the nation when they explained the motive for the killings. Now, while the prosecution's main argument was that the boys killed for money, the defense claimed that the boys had committed the crime in self-defense since they were in constant fear of their father because he'd threatened to kill them if they told anyone about the years of SA they both suffered as children.
That's really sad.
And yeah, I mean, I guess it all comes down to a couple of things with this case. A lot of people don't, I guess, understand the whole idea of this being a self-defense case because a lot of people don't understand the whole logic of why people can't just leave an abusive situation. That's the whole key to this. Like, I think a lot of people are just like, oh, they had money, they had cars, they were adults. They're missing the whole piece that they always say about battered women, like, why don't they just leave? And that's the whole problem is when they leave, the chances of being murdered are exponentially raised, or it's increased that they'll be murdered or hurt during that time. So I think a lot of people miss that piece of this case.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine if the brothers did, say, oh, we're going to leave, then okay, you know far too much for me to allow you to, go live your life. You know way too much about me from the father's perspective. So you could see why they were terrified of even attempting to run.
Yeah. And there was testimony actually that there was heightened tensions and there was threats made like immediately before the murders.
So the defense also argued that killing their father for $650,000 when he was worth far more than that, if they waited just a little bit longer for a separate $2 million life insurance policy to kick in, and it seemed rather short-sighted. If money was the motive, you'd hang on. You'd wait for the bigger payout, realistically.
Yeah, it was only 2 weeks. Why not?
Yeah. So during the trial, multiple witnesses came forward to reinforce the defense narrative to prove that the boys were, in fact, horribly abused throughout their lives and both feared both of their parents. The boys also took the stand and gave testimony of the abuse. Several cousins came forward as witnesses. A female cousin named Diane had lived with the family during summers when she was young, and she testified that when she was just 8 years old, Lyle actually confided in her about the essay from his father. She said, "One night I was in my room changing the sheets in my bed, and Lyle came in. He became very serious and saying that he was afraid to sleep in his own bed because his father and him had been touching each other down there, indicating that it was his private area." And Diana also claimed that she told Kitty what Lyle had told her, but Kitty didn't believe her. And since Lyle Menendez sort of never mentioned it again, Diane had made the assumption that it had sort of ended, the essay had stopped.
I mean, number one, I can't imagine that this Diane is just like making this up. So not only does it show Lyle that was coming to her as a child saying this is happening, but now Diane said she brought it to the mother, who's supposed to be a protector of the children, who is supposed to be protecting them from any kind of abuse in the home. And it's indicating that the mother was enabling it by not doing anything about it. So it's two things that I'm seeing. Just in that situation alone, her testimony right there.
I mean, what I've seen a few times in sort of SA cases and DV cases and all the sort of, abuse. When you tell the mother is sometimes also being abused, and it's easier for her to just say this isn't happening and just avoid any kind of, actualization of what is actually happening to you, which is sad again, but it happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I try to talk about a lot on my channel, actually. And one of the things I realized with Kitty, I actually went back and I looked at her history too, because I was like, well, why would somebody like Kitty, like what happened to her, right? It wasn't just that Jose was, it also came out at trial that he was just like really the most abrasive person that most people had ever met, and the most abusive person most people have ever met. And that came from like coworkers. It came from coaches who said he was the harshest like parent like they had ever dealt with. Teachers said the same thing. Teachers said Jose came and threatened them at work about the kids' grades. So not only was he a harsh man that Kitty found herself with, but it also came out that Kitty's father was extremely abusive. So Kitty grew up watching her mother getting abused. I believe that Kitty also was abused. They think even essayed as a child. I don't know if there's any truth to that. So it wasn't just that she wound up in this abusive relationship with Jose. It was also that like she came from a background of, a mother who had seen all this going on and maybe didn't protect her own children, that kind of thing, where she grew up with it. I believe also that Kitty's father left the home and got remarried, but I believe that the mother was always like forever just so depressed that her husband left her. That Kitty grew up believing that divorce was the absolute worst thing that could ever happen. So once you also add that piece of it to the story, that not only was she abused as a child, but to her, leaving somebody like Jose would be the worst thing to ever happen. Shows also why she may have tried to keep the family together even when it should have been pulled apart.
I suppose growing up in that as well, it kind of reinforces the wrong attitude to marriage and to parenthood, and well, my mum never did it, so why should I, kind of thing.
Right.
But it's about breaking the cycle, isn't it? So I kind of feel, I do think there was definitely like the ringleader as such, but she didn't do anything to stop it. So she was also, marked as that as well. I feel like if she was on her own, it might not have ended this way, but it was the father. A lot of it comes back to the father, especially when it's friends, family, teachers. Everybody's got the same viewpoint of this person.
Yeah.
He was a mean guy.
He was. But it did come out at the trial too that not only was Kitty an enabler of the abuse and kind of like turning a blind eye, but Lyle also testified that Kitty essayed him as well. So that would also go back to, okay, was she essayed by her father as a child too? I don't know, but that was his testimony at trial. It was definitely the father that was habitually abusing both boys. One of the big, I guess, reasons why I kind of do believe that Kitty knew was there's a note from her therapist that I guess the family had, quote, sick and embarrassing secrets. And so what are those sick and embarrassing secrets? Like what could that possibly be?
I mean,
And I,
whilst you've not said specifically what it is, sick and embarrassing. Yeah.
I think a lot of people also forget that at trial they had found pictures of the boys, like from the neck down. But I believe during trial in one of the pictures it appeared that one of them had an erection. So why would you keep that photo? So people try to say the abuse didn't happen and there's no proof of it, but there's just strange things.
They say, oh, well, there's no evidence to prove. Okay, I get that. But there is also evidence to say something was happening.
Right.
The photograph with the erection, you wouldn't keep that.
No, I wouldn't as a mother, no.
No, I mean, even as soon as you saw it, it'd be, oh, bin, or tear it up or get rid of it. But the sick and embarrassing secrets and the cousins and everyone that said he was a brazen man, and it all sort of points to. So even though it's not evidence as such, it is evidence as such for me.
No, I agree. Now, in 1993, this type of family abuse had never really been heard by most people. So it was extremely rare to hear about anything like this publicly. So most people actually believe that it was so over the top, the testimony, and dramatic that the boys had to be lying or acting. In fact, the boys became a national mockery. Saturday Night Live did skits on them, and many late night comedians actually joked about their testimony. I remember actually seeing the SNL skits, and I remember they were just a big joke in the media, from what I remember. I know you're younger than me, so you probably don't remember, and
No, I was born
you probably didn't see anything over there, right? Were you even born?
I was born in September of 93, so
okay. You'd been watching from your crib.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, that stuff really did not age well. If you go back and look,
Yeah.
have you seen some of the old SNL skits?
I've not, but I'm gonna go and have a look because I can see why they'd make. Well, I can't see why they'd make jokes, but I can see why they'd make jokes.
It wasn't just a mockery of the talking about it. They were mocking how they were crying as they were testifying to the abuse.
See, that's
which it's a different world now, completely different world. And I think it all comes from the Me Too movement and everything that happened worldwide, really. But I think we look at, abuse and SA way differently 35 years later. Yeah, at the time, it was just a joke.
That's really sad.
Really?
Despite, being mocked in public then, Erik and Lyle continued forward with their testimony. This remained the same. Erik went into detail that the real motive came about a week before the killings. He had just graduated high school earlier that year, and he'd got into UCLA, and he was very excited to move out of the house and be on campus, living, at the college, because he'd be moving out and be totally free from his father's abuse, which, anyone can understand. However, Erik claimed that his father told him that he would be required to come back home several nights a week so that he could supervise his homework. Erik claimed he knew what that meant. He said more essay from his father at night, that he knew what was coming. And Erik actually testified that this revelation was what sent him into the depressive tailspin. You can understand it. If I'm finally free, I finally get to go to UCLA, I get to go live on campus, and you're telling me to come home to supervise homework. I'm a student. I don't need supervision. And he knew exactly what it meant.
Right. And to him, I remember the testimony was that he had seen that his brother was allowed to go to Princeton. His brother was allowed to go all the way to New Jersey, from California to New Jersey, and he had freedom. But here he is, wasn't even able to get away. So I guess to him, I could see how that would feel like you're so excited to finally be free, and then all of a sudden you're realizing that you're still going to maintain controlled by this abuser.
It's very I don't know the word, but it feels very trapped. I feel like you wouldn't be able to get away. So you can see why the stories started to form of how to get away from these people.
Right. Because I guess he was seeing that it was never going to end.
That would send anyone into a depressive tailspin. It really would.
Sure. So in fact, it was around that time that Erik said he finally told his brother Lyle that Jose had been essaying him since he was a child. And this is when both brothers said that they sat down and spoke and they realized it had happened to both of them. So during that conversation, being the older brother who had already had that freedom, he promised Erik that he would confront their father for him, and then he would threaten the father to stop the essay immediately, or they were going to expose him. So 2 days after that, Erik said Lyle did stand up for him. He confronted their father and threatened to reveal the family secret unless Jose stopped the essay. And it was also during that conversation where Lyle said, I can't remember the exact quote, but after they kind of came at their father, or Lyle came at the father and said, if you don't stop this, I'm going to expose you. And the father said something to the effect of, well, you're going to do that anyway. You've made your choice. He said something like, you've made your choice. Now I have to make mine.
That's terrifying.
I think so. If it really happened, I think that's terrifying. It's a threat,
You can read between the lines on it, can't you?
Right. Erik testified that it was later that night that his father burst into his room and screamed at him for telling Lyle. Because I guess the threat was always, don't tell anybody. I guess this is what groomers do. Like, this is what these pedophile child molesters do, is they threaten the child from the very beginning. If you tell anybody, this is going to happen and whatnot. So I'm sure he was obviously threatened his whole life. So even more upsetting than that, now if you can imagine how upsetting and scary this whole situation is, Erik testified it was after that incident with his father bursting into the room that Kitty actually admitted to Erik that she had known about the essay the whole time. That was so upsetting to him, right? Because he remembered as a child, he had tried to tell her a few times, and she always made it either that he was like lying about it or he was over exaggerating the situation. So he felt in her finally admitting to his face that she knew, it was like the worst thing he ever heard, he said, because that proved to him that she had known and she was not willing to protect them. And that to him was the worst of the worst.
Feels like you've been gaslit your entire life.
Yeah, because at least I guess you have that hope that, maybe they're just not believing it.
Yeah.
But when you really knew that she knew for a fact and still did nothing, that's disgusting. That's the key to possibly why. Because people are always like, well, why did they kill her too? Well, because she always stood by him, didn't she?
And you made it that like I was lying. You made out that I was, enhancing the story or
right. So like you said, gaslighting you. So it was further abuse, right? Because it wasn't even like she was taking him at his word and being like, oh, I'm sorry that's she wasn't even acknowledging the truth. She was gaslighting him even more, which is abuse.
Well, that was the same. Erik and Lyle said that was the same night that they began to think about actually killing the parents. I could see it as a trigger, to be fair, because they wanted to eliminate the threat of the awful family secret getting out as well. And the boys knew that their mother had recently purchased a gun that she kept in her closet. She also, so they also knew that the parents were technically armed. You have something that could potentially end my life. So there is that defensive thing there as well. He said he and Lyle stayed awake all night and discussed whether to go to the police, to talk to relatives, or to go and get their own weapons. The answer seemed to be that the father would always be the one in control because he had all the money and all the power, which makes sense. And the boys agreed that they would have to either kill or be killed. That was their choice. That's where they got. And
that argument that the defense had, to me, personally looking at it, it does make sense. They did prove at trial that the mother, Kitty, did purchase a weapon. I can't remember how many months before all of this went down, but Erik was with her when she purchased the gun, and they had the receipt for it and everything with the date. And he testified that he said, what are you going to do with that? And his mother replied, I'm going to kill somebody. And now at the time, Kitty knew that Jose was having an affair.
Mm.
So there's this whole other thing where Kitty was using a lot of pills. She was drinking and taking a lot of pills because she was depressed herself. And when she found out about this affair, it was even more, I guess, triggering for her. So she replied she was going to kill somebody. So Erik said he wasn't sure if she meant their father or this woman, this other woman. So, and they knew that their mother was like kind of erratic and becoming like a little more out of control. So the fact that they did know there was a weapon in the house, I think that does line up with their self-defense argument. You know, even if, let's just say, even if the boys are making up the essay stuff, I mean, there were like over 50 witnesses who said that Jose is the most brutal person they ever met. Living in constant, like that constant fear, like, you know, my parents weren't anywhere near as abusive as that, but I still grew up as a child being like fearful a little bit of getting in trouble. I'm an 80s baby. You were not. A lot of us were raised differently to like kind of fear our parents, I guess. So I kind of always grew up kind of afraid. So adding on top of that, like Jose is just like the most brutal person and there's a weapon in the house.
Yeah.
And I can really see that being like, there's no way to get away from this guy.
Yeah.
And there's other pieces to the story too that we're not getting into that I know. For instance, Lyle had gotten his girlfriend pregnant and Jose met up with the girlfriend in secret and offered her like a huge amount of money to abort the child. So he found out about it. But there was all these things their father would do. He would fly to Princeton and try to threaten like the president of Princeton, like all kinds of stuff. Like he was so wealthy and so powerful, more than most people realize. And he was very manipulative. And he used to teach the boys, Kitty and Jose's like whole thing they taught the boys was that it's okay to cheat, just win. It's okay. Just win. Win, win, win. He was always playing dirty. I guess I'll put it that way. So they really did fear that even if they would go to the police or if they would report it somehow, that he would always have the upper hand because he would always be like 10 steps ahead of them with knowledge and information. And there was another piece too, that Erik couldn't figure out how his mother always knew what was going on in his life. And I guess they found out later that the mother was recording his phone calls and then she was listening. So can you imagine you're a teenager and you're like, how does my mother know I did X, Y, and Z? How does she know? She was recording him. So he had in his mind, his parents somehow had these like magical powers of knowing everything he was doing and planning. And that was proven that she was recording him. So that's another piece. When you consider that, like, and that was testimony at the trial, I can see that being proof that you really do believe that they're going to be, like I said, 10 steps ahead of you.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
Crazy, right? I think that's going to be it for us today, right?
Yeah.
If you like the show, please remember to like and subscribe so we don't lose each other. And remember to keep an eye out for the part 2 of this series coming soon.
And remember, when you're walking home at night, da, da, da.
Oh.